Okay guys, I see it all the time. It's on the subreddit multiple times per week. New Digimon players want to know what starter deck they should buy. Unfortunately, there isn't a cut and dry answer, so in this video, I'll try my best to provide enough information for you to make an informed decision. I will be assuming everyone watching this knows the basic rules of the game at the very least. If you don't, I highly recommend downloading the Digimon Card Game tutorial app and playing through it. It only takes about 15 minutes and will provide a lot of needed context for the rest of the video. You'll also be hearing some TCG jargon throughout the video, which I will provide definitions for on screen as they come up. A quick history lesson before I start. There are currently 12 starter decks in the English Digimon card game. The first 6 decks were released as 2 sets of 3, and all decks after that have been released in pairs. This is a good time to mention that I won't be talking about the first 6 starter decks in this video. And I know what you're thinking, how outrageous of me to promise a starter deck review and then proceed to leave half of them out. The thing is, they're just not worth buying anymore. They're out of print and can be hard to find, especially the original 3 decks, which are now being scalped by speculators. They're outdated gameplay-wise, being too slow and weak to accurately portray modern Digimon. Lastly, they're all color-themed decks, not archetype decks. Digimon is an archetype game, which means these decks will never receive future support, because there is no archetype to support. To be clear, these decks are fine to learn the game with, but if you want to go any further than that, you'll basically have to start completely from scratch because they're not upgradable in any meaningful way. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about how I'll be evaluating the remaining decks. I'll review them 2 at a time, since like I said earlier, these decks are released in pairs and are meant to be played against each other, so I think it's appropriate to directly compare them. I'll give a brief overview of each deck, including their strengths, weaknesses, general playstyle, and win conditions. I'll then grade each deck based on 3 criteria: learning, value, and upgrade potential. The learning grade will reflect how easy each deck is to pick up and play, especially for brand new players with no TCG experience. Simple decks with straightforward game plans are best, as are decks that explore a variety of mechanics. The value grade is based on how many cards in the deck are useful outside of the starter decks, with extra points being given to cards that see play in multiple decks. Some decks also come with special bonus cards in the box, and these will be factored in as well. Upgrade potential is exactly what it sounds like. If you were to fully upgrade the deck, how strong would it be? How does it stack up in the current meta? Since the next several sets have been spoiled, we know it's to come for quite a while. I will be giving a separate sub-score that accounts for future support where appropriate. Finally, I'll talk a bit about the head-to-head matchup between each pair, including some strategy tips. At the end, I'll wrap up with my own personal picks. Hopefully you're still with me because that was a lot, so let's get started with starter decks 7 and 8, Gallantmon and UlforceVeedramon respectively. I will admit my bias here, these were my first decks and I adore them. Admittedly, they're also pretty outdated gameplay-wise because neither deck really uses an engine, but they are archetype decks, which means they're eligible for future support. Gallantmon is a removal-heavy deck bordering on a control playstyle. It can deal a lot of damage in a hurry, but has very poor draw power, so it's prone to bricking. Gallantmon will usually try to end the game by attacking for big damage, while at the same time deleting opposing Digimon to make defending difficult. Ulforce is a mid-range deck with efficient removal and great consistency with the ability to draw cards and search when needed. It's prone to removal though, so you might need to stay in breeding a little longer than normal. Ulforce wants to get 8 cards in hand ASAP, which will activate many strong inherited abilities. This extra juice leads to big damage and can be used to quickly end the game. Both decks start out strong with an S in the learning category, the easiest and quickest to learn out of the whole bunch. Though I did call these decks outdated, that's a good thing in this case. Both decks have a very simple game plan that is easy to execute while also leaving room for strategic optimization once players have more practice. Gallantmon scores a rather lackluster D in value. The Gallantmon line still sees play, but only in Gallantmon decks. Even then, I'm not sure how many of these cards will stick around once the new support comes out. The only reason it doesn't score an F is because both the Gallantmon and Ulforce decks come with one of each colored memory boost as bonus cards, very strong staples that see play in a ton of decks. Ulforce fares a bit better with a C in value. Vmon, Gabumon, Dracomon, and Cordramon all see play outside of Ulforce, though some more than others. Veedramon is a very important card in Ulforce lists, and of course the memory boosts are huge value adds. Ulforce itself sometimes sees play in Ulforce lists, but it ironically isn't even the best version of Ulforce, so it's there more as a backup. Gallantmon takes it in the upgrade potential category with a solid B. The current Gallantmon deck is not at the top of the meta, but it still sees play and has decent matchups. Additional support is coming, but it's a ways off, and the deck already has good support, so I'm comfortable leaving it at B. It pains my heart, but I have to give Ulforce an F here. It just isn't anywhere close to being meta and sees no play at serious tournaments. It hasn't gotten any direct support since the starter decks came out, but it just wasn't enough. The good news is that new support is on the horizon, which will change up the deck considerably. Current predictions place it as a decent deck, which should see some competitive play in upcoming formats. With this in mind, Ulforce gets a future support subscore of B. The head-to-head for these decks is quite even at all skill levels. Players will find these decks consistently deliver games that feel fair and well balanced. Ulforce is on the defensive in this matchup matchup since Gallantmon has a ton of removal. Stay in breeding until you're ready to go for big damage. Use your own removal wisely and don't leave low-level Digimon on the field so Gallantmon can't benefit from deleting them. Gallantmon players should make wise use of their removal, burning down big threats and swinging momentum with Geo and Ragnaloardmonn when possible. Use Lightning Joust to surprise the opponent with big damage and try to establish a threatening board to force Ulforce out of breeding early. Moving on to the second pair, starter decks 9 and 10, Ultimate Ancient Dragon and Parallel World Tactician. Those names are ridiculous though, so I'll be referring to them as Imperialdramon and Mastemon respectively, referring to the featured boss monsters of the decks. These decks take a pretty big step up in complexity, focusing on the then brand new DNA Digivolution mechanic as well as the more complex game plans that go along with it. Both decks are also two-color decks with Imperialdramon combining blue and green while Mastemon combines yellow and purple. Imperialdramon is an aggro deck with some very strong and efficient removal options. It can win games very fast when drawing well, but can brick pretty bad if you don't get the cards you need. Unsurprisingly, this deck wins by DNA Digivolving into Imperialdramon to flood the board and threaten a victory during the next turn. Mastemon is a control-style starter deck, utilizing a non-linear strategy. In other words, there are many options at any given time, allowing for creative gameplay. It can be quite slow to set up, but it's very scary once it gets going. Similar to Imperialdramon, Mastemon wins by DNA Digivolving to create a very powerful stack, while simultaneously eliminating threats from the opponent's side. Grading these decks on learning is tough. On one hand, I have first-hand experience teaching a group of friends to play. None of them had prior TCG experience and got confused by the DNA Digivolution mechanics. They all preferred the previous Gallantmon and Ulforce decks for their simplicity. On the other hand, these decks represent the current state of Digimon way better than the previous pair of decks, specifically their use of an actual engine, featuring real combos and an overall higher level of strategy. Still, I want to err on the side of caution and will give these decks a C. I will say that these are great decks to graduate to once you've got a solid grasp of the basics, but I'd probably advise against starting with these. Both of these decks have great value despite being the only pair not to include any bonus cards. Imperial comes with Megadeth, one of the best option cards in the game, as well as Vmon and Imperialdramon, all of which see play outside of Imperialdramon. Stingmon, Dinobemon, and Imperialdramon itself see play in the upgraded deck along with the previously mentioned cards, so there's a lot of carryover. Imperialdramon easily earns an A. Mastemon is nearly as good, earning a B. Chaos Degradation is one of the most feared option cards in the game for a reason, and is a standout card in control decks. Gatomon is a great value engine, and Angelomon is an excellent target to play for free with Mastemon's effect. Obviously, Mastemon is a great card, and Salamon is a nice rookie to have for the inherited effect. Even Junimon sneaks into some decks at one copy. Overall, most of these cards see play only in Mastemon decks, with a few finding their way into security control, so I think B is more than fair. Upgrade potential is quite good for both of these decks, with both seeing competitive play in the current format. Mastemon has been holding pretty steady in the upper half of the meta, so I have no problem awarding it an A. Imperial has fared slightly worse, but still puts up consistent results, a solid B, about on par with Gallantmon. Both of these decks are great choices if you want to play competitively either at locals or big tournaments. These decks both have bright futures as well. Imperialdramon has some frankly ridiculous support coming later in 2023, and Mastemon will be buffed up quite a bit as well in the near future. I don't want to overblow it, but I'm gonna give Imperialdramon an S subgrade for future support, while Mastemon stays at A. Both of these archetypes are fan favorites too, so both are safe bets to receive frequent support. For the head-to-head, honestly it's a little bit messy since both decks suffer consistency issues, not only due to needing specific pieces for DNA Digivolving, but also from being two colors. If I had to pick a winner, I'd say it's easier for Imperialdramon to win with a rushdown since Mastemon is pretty slow. Still, both decks only have their main boss monster at 2 copies, both of which are way stronger than the secondary level 6s, so a lot of the time the winner is decided by which player is lucky enough to draw their good level 6 first. As for strategy, Mastemon's best friend is Ghostmon. Since Imperialdramon will try to rush you down, being able to throw out a blocker for free in a pinch is incredibly valuable. You can recycle Ghostmon with Darkness Wave and Witchmon, and you can play it for free from your trash with Night Raid or even Mastemon. Don't forget to hardplay Angelomon to nullify attacks and buy yourself more time to set up for a big DNA Digivolve. Imperialdramon is the faster deck and has a lot of ways to gun down Mastemon's pieces before they set up. Imperialdramon can bottom deck a Digimon with 6000 DP or less, basically getting rid of it permanently. Dinobemon can suspend a Digimon and attack into it, even Mastemon, who usually dodges Imperialdramon's effect due to having 7000 DP. Flower Cannon can be used the same way as Dinobemon for very cheap removal. Megadeth is an extremely efficient way to remove Mastemon, but make sure it can't just be played again right away or you'll regret it. On to our final pair, Starter Decks 12 and 13. Wait, what happened to Starter Deck 11? Well, long story short, Starter Deck 11 is a deck made exclusively of reprints, mostly from the first Starter Deck and the first 3 booster sets. Unfortunately, it was never released in English and never will be. What happened to the cards? Well, they were released in special box topper packs with BT10. That sounds fine until you realize that these packs only contain 1 card each among 16 total cards that make up ST11. Obviously, with such low pull rates, it did basically nothing for the price of the expensive cards from the deck, specifically Tai and Greymon. So yeah, we got corporate greed instead of Starter Deck 11. Thanks, Bandai. Very cool. This time for real, let's talk about starter decks 12 and 13, Jesmon and Ragnaloardmonn. While the other pairs are pretty similar to each other, these ones are actually quite a bit different. Jesmon is somewhat of a toolbox deck that focuses on playing out a threatening boss monster and then flooding the board with smaller bodies that can protect it. It is very strong as far as starter decks go, and frankly has no major weaknesses except for lack of draw power and being bogged down by vanillas, which is true of all starter decks. Ragnaloardmonn, which I'll be calling Ragna for short, is a very unique deck that uses DNA Digivolution to bring out a nearly unkillable boss monster, powered by what I can only call gambling mechanics, to get the materials on the field for free, if you're lucky of course. When the deck goes off, it's almost a guaranteed win. However, assembling the win condition is not only very inconsistent, it is extremely vulnerable to disruption by the opponent. Jesmon gets a very strong A for learning. It's pretty straightforward, much more than Ragna, and even Imperialdramon and Mastemon. It includes a wide variety of mechanics, and in my opinion has an engine that portrays the modern state of Digimon better than any other deck. The only thing preventing an S is that it's a little bit busy with effects, which may be overwhelming to new players. Unfortunately, I have to slap Ragna with an F for learning. The main mechanic it uses doesn't show up anywhere else, it's luck-based and therefore inherently inconsistent, and is just convoluted in general. On top of all of that, the deck features DNA Digivolution. This one checks all the wrong boxes. If you are new to Digimon, please do not pick this up as your first deck. For value, I want to say first that these decks are going to receive inflated grades because they come with a reprint of Davis, a card valued at around $20 before it was reprinted, now sitting at around $7. It sees a ton of play and is a very powerful staple in both blue and green. With this in mind, Jesmon gets a B. There are a lot of good pieces in this deck, but they're all exclusive to Jesmon, save for Solarmon. The Jesmon line, both Sistermons, and Master to Disciple are all great cards. Solarmon is a floodgate, so it has the potential to show up in a lot of decks. I've seen Volcanomon as a one-of in some lists because it's a cyborg, but this is a very niche use. The Ragna starter deck actually has the most useful pieces of any starter deck. Like Jesmon, almost every card in this deck is exclusive to its own archetype, except for Chikurimon and Ragna himself. Chikurimon is the same kind of floodgate as Solarmon, except it's black, so it will see a lot of play. Ragna is an extremely strong finisher and sees play in some other red and black decks. Besides that, almost every non-vanilla in the deck is used in the upgraded version, making it incredibly easy to beef up the deck. I'll give an A here, one higher than Jesmon, because there are just so many pieces relevant to the upgraded deck, along with a few cards that are useful elsewhere. Evaluating upgrade potential is kinda weird for Jesmon. I fully believe it to be a very strong deck when upgraded. I think it deserves at least a B, but I have to defer to the data, and as you can see, Jesmon isn't even on the list for this format. Why the mismatch? Well, after digging around a bit and talking to some very good Jesmon players, it's still not entirely clear. Maybe Dexmon has something to do with it, and it honestly could be a combination of many reasons, including matchups and deck construction, but I don't want to get into it here. Maybe I'm just too optimistic about the true power level of the deck, but as it stands, I'm forced to give Jesmon a C. The data doesn't support anything higher at this time, and frankly, I doubt that will change for the rest of the format. Ragna is in a similarly strange position as Jesmon. On one hand, I want to call it a meme deck and give it an F, but I have to be honest, that's not the full story. There is an argument to be made for Ragna being a niche anti-meta deck. Despite the inconsistency, it actually has the potential to outpace a lot of the best decks, beating them down before they have a chance to set up. Some decks just don't have an answer for Ragna and will fold very quickly after it comes out. That being said, anti-meta is not the same as meta. I have to be conservative and give a D here, since there are no tournament results to justify anything higher. To be clear, Ragna could be a really strong pick in smaller tournaments where the variety of decks is lower, allowing it to benefit greatly from its lopsided matchups. If you can see a weakness in your local meta, Ragna might be a great surprise pick that nobody is ready for. Future support for both decks is uncertain since nothing has been confirmed as of the publishing of this video. I anticipate Jesmon receiving fairly regular support since it's a popular Digimon as well as a Royal Knight. Ragna is pretty unpopular in comparison, so I don't see it getting the same amount of love, but I would love to be wrong about that. In the head-to-head, Ragna just gets bodied. I estimate that Jesmon wins 70 to 80% of the time. Jesmon's main strategy is to kneecap one of Ragna's stacks by attacking it unsuspended with Savior Huckmon's effect. That's really all it takes to set Ragna back significantly, and it's just a matter of finishing the game after that. This is such a big threat that Ragna will likely be forced to hide in breeding, limiting the number of effects it can use, while hoping to get pieces on the board in time. Ragna's main strategy involves rearranging the top of your deck using Legend Arms Alliance. You can use this to get out your level 5s for free with your rookie effects. After that, you kinda just have to hope you draw into your level 6s so you can DNA Digivolve. Even if you get both level 6s, you still need Ragna, and at just 2 copies, he's not easy to find. You can try to win with Durandamon or Briwe, but neither will win you the game in a timely fashion. The longer they stick around on the field, the more time Jesmon has to kill a stack and ruin your momentum. I've tried to be as objective as possible when reviewing these decks, but what are my subjective opinions? Which deck would I recommend to a brand new player with no TCG experience? My first choice would be Jesmon. It's a solid all-around deck that teaches a ton of mechanics and has an engine that's easy to understand. My second choice might be a bit of a hot take to some, and that's Gallantmon. Yeah, it's a little weak compared to the other decks, but it's the most straightforward by far. In this case, being bare bones is a big positive because it allows players to focus on the fundamentals of the game without drowning in card effects. My favorite of the bunch is Mastemon. Despite probably being the most complex of all the starters, it's that complexity that makes it fun to use. There are a ton of ways to be creative with the deck and turn the tide with clever use of effects. The construction of the deck is also top-notch. I feel like it has less blatantly awful cards than any other starter. It feels the most functional out of the box. My least favorite is easily Ragna. Honestly, it's the only starter that I consider to be a bad product. It's way too out there with weird mechanics to really offer much valuable experience. The funny part is that I actually really like the upgraded Ragna deck, but the starter is miserable to use because it's so luck-based and the odds are not in your favor. I want to point out that none of these decks include tamers of any kind, a big part of the game, so just be aware of that when you're learning. If you have some tamers from booster packs or from the Jesmon and Ragna starters, I would throw them in just to get used to the strategy and mechanics that tamers add to the game. Before I go, I want to mention the Digimon TCG 2020 Discord server. It's the main hub for the Digimon Card Game and is extremely beginner friendly. I mention it because it's easily the best place to ask about rules questions. While learning the game, you will inevitably run into many rules interactions that you don't know how to handle. The experienced players and judges in the Discord are happy to answer questions. I've never waited more than 5 minutes for an answer, so you can ask about something in the middle of a game with minimal interference. The Discord is also a great way to meet other players and get games over webcam, especially nice if you don't have anybody to play with locally. The link is in the description. Well, that's about it. I hope you found this video helpful. Let me know your starter deck opinions in the comments. I would love to read them. Bye!